Let us return once again to the use of the sacred word. If you have noticed when you tried to quiet down and introduce a sacred word of one or two syllables on your imagination, on the surface level of the river of consciousness, you might have noticed some flashing lights or bright lights or a flood of visual images. And this is sometimes a good indication that one will do better with this contemplative practice by using a general and not detailed visual image, such as a general loving look towards someone you love, or towards some beautiful distant vista, or the ocean, or some such image as this. And this is quite all right to return to when you notice you're getting stuck on some bright impression, emotion, thought, or external perception. And so all that I'm saying can be applied to either method, or either a auditory or a visual image. And I would think you could also use the sense of touch as a point of departure, such as following one's breath very gently when one notices one is thinking some other thought. Try them out and see how they work. And so we'll change this then, or include in our perspective the idea of a sacred symbol, which is sacred not because of its inherent meaning, but because of the meaning that you give it as the symbol of your intention to consent or to be with God in pure faith during the agreed upon time that you've set, which is usually 20 to 30 minutes, but can be longer if you prefer. Let's imagine then that we have begun a period of centering prayer, as I have outlined it. And one has found a position that's relatively comfortable, which you won't have to change during the entire period. Hence, if you're comfortable sitting on the floor, fine. But the advantage of this kind of practice is that if you learn to do it in a chair, you can do it almost anywhere, in a plane, in an airport, on a train, while commuting, provided, of course, you're not the driver. And then you also close your eyes. In some traditions, they have their eyes fixed on a point on the floor, and they really are looking inwardly, not at that object. So if you're accustomed to that practice, and you're not really noticing what's going on around you, that also is an option. But normally for most of us, when we close our eyes, half the world disappears, because we usually think about what we see as much as anything else. It's also a symbol of letting go of our time-space continuum, of the place we're in, and also our inward thoughts and preoccupations that we might have had just before sitting down. And so after making a little prayer or establishing our relationship of faith, which, as we've seen, is what prayer really is, with God present within us, we introduce ever so gently in our imagination this sacred symbol that we've chosen. And it's like this little boat. It's designed to slow down the flow of other thoughts. And so naturally we will say it or repeat it or allow it to repeat itself in the beginning again and again. We recommend the discreet use of this sacred symbol. That means you don't have to use it all the time. It's not a mantra that one repeats constantly to fix it in one's imagination and to drive out other thoughts. That would be approaching a concentrative method. In this prayer of centering, we only use it as needed. And that means that we use it a lot in the beginning, but whenever we notice the interior attraction towards peace, calm, or quiet, we allow ourselves to move with that attraction. And then when thoughts arise, in the sense of impressions, emotions, perceptions from outside, noises that we might hear in the distance, phones ringing and so on, we make up our minds that this is bound to happen in some degree, and we don't resist any thought or impression that comes. This is rather important because often in the beginning, people try to use the sacred word as a kind of bat, a baseball bat, to knock out whatever thoughts out of the park, so to speak, come into one's imagination, or as a bulldozer to kind of drive out other thoughts. And you have to completely get over the idea that a passing thought is a distraction. In this prayer, you'll be glad to hear, there are no distractions unless you get up and walk out or deliberately start thinking of something else, lunch or something. If we were doing discursive meditating or reflecting on the gospel, which are earlier stages of Lectio Divina, a preparation for this fourth and final and fulfilling stage of Lectio Divina, then it would be a distraction. But we're not on the level of the imagination or reasoning. We're at that lower level, in that lower office where we went when we dropped through the trap door and allowed all the clients who had been clamoring for our attention just to get lost up there in our office and to use it as much as they like. We've left, and we've gone to a deeper level. Now, as this using the image here, we have simply turned our attention to our spiritual nature with its values and towards God who dwells as the source and center of it. So when we speak of centering prayer, we're not just speaking of sort of centering our attention. We're more concerned with moving towards the center of our being, which is God, okay? The God of pure faith. And we're leaving behind that peripheral or surface attention or consciousness that is the ordinary consciousness of daily life. So now suppose that we introduce our sacred word very gently, and along come some other thoughts, what we might have been thinking about before we sat down, or what we're going to do when the prayer time is over. Now we've made our intention that we're going to give our total presence to God during this period. So with that firm intention and that orientation, all one needs to do is to renew it from time to time when it's challenged. For example, suppose you were in the supermarket buying your groceries for the week. There's background music going all the time. Well, you didn't come to the supermarket for the background music. You could do better at home. But every now and then you notice a few familiar strains that, they're playing Tchaikovsky's Six or something. But you couldn't care less because you want your tomatoes and your potatoes and so on. So you just ignore virtually without even trying to, because your interest is someplace else. Now the someplace else where our interest is at the depths of our being, the depths of our flowing participation in the river of life or of consciousness. And as we develop through practice a sense of that place, this might be called spiritual attentiveness. And there's a birthing that takes place in this process. It takes a little time to cultivate it and to experience it, but you don't experience it by trying or by effort. Rather, it's by letting go of all effort, with the exception of maintaining gently this simple loving look or this listening attentiveness at this deepest level to the Word of God addressing itself mysteriously to the depths of our being. Another example that might be helpful is that every now and then, not only are there some casual thoughts that you're not interested in going by, but every now and then some flashy boat comes down the stream of consciousness, and one says, oh, how interesting, I wonder what's on board. And so now you're getting involved with the particular thought impression. Or it could be a feeling. You feel a certain association of memories. Perhaps you're going to make a speech in the evening, and the thought passes by, I'm going to make that speech, and instantly you have a certain feeling of anxiety, how's it going to go, and so on, feeling of fear. Now, this is the time then when you need to return gently to the sacred word to reaffirm your intention of letting go of that thought, every thought that might be flowing along the surface of your river of consciousness, or you're simply reaffirming your intention to be present with this heart-to-heart conversation that is going on with God, established by your attention in the beginning. It's something like conferring with a dear friend on the seventh floor, let us say, of a building downtown, with the windows open in the summer, and you hear the traffic going in the street. That would be like the background music. In the supermarket, it's just noise. White noise, is that what they call it? Yes. So, but every now and then, let us say at the rush hour, that noise rises, the decibels go up, or maybe there's a little accident there and you hear this screeching of brakes, and you look to the window and you're about to rush to the window to see what happened. And then you recall, oh my, I'm in this heart-to-heart conversation, this cheek-to-jowl sort of tete-a-tete communing with God. What have I done? Please don't go through all this ritual. All you have to do is to turn your eyes back to the beloved as if to reaffirm the communion you're having, or as if to say, excuse me, or as I was saying. That's all the sacred word is. You don't think about its content, however holy it might be. You're simply using it as the symbol of your intention to renew the communion, the communing process when it's interrupted by some unexpected, interesting, attractive, or repulsive thought. Remember that negative feelings are simply an attraction in reverse, or an attachment in reverse, and there's still an attachment. And the purpose of this prayer, of returning to the sacred word patiently over and over again, is to gradually create, drop by drop, this cloud of unknowing in which you have a habit of letting go of any kind of perception, impression, however holy it may be. Now, sometimes you get some psychic phenomenon in this space. You don't have to look for it, but it really is an interruption. And this is not the time for such things. And it's not the time for psychological breakthroughs. And some people who are already familiar with prayer have some difficulty at this point if they feel an inspiration, let us say, to pray for somebody or some special intention. Well, all I can say is that in sitting down in the first place and engaging God in this communing, one is praying for everyone on earth, past, present, and to come, just by this gesture. So there's no danger of not praying for everybody. In fact, it's good to think of oneself as sitting with Christ on the cross. Historically, it's probable that actually there was a prop on the cross and that Christ was sitting, because in crucifixion, if there wasn't some support, the hands would be ripped out of the nails probably. So not out of mercy, but out of malice, the criminals were sometimes made to suffer longer by providing them with a sort of little perch or seat. And so in sitting down, one is opening oneself not only to God, but to his will throughout the whole of creation. Hence one is communing, oneing, you might say, with all reality, and especially with the needs of all human beings. And so one is truly praying at the deepest possible level for everyone as one enters into the faith dimension and allows the Spirit, who knows the needs of everybody, to pray within you in words beyond your perception or understanding, which are probably not words anyway, but energy, positive energy, the energy of infinite goodness, compassion, and kindness, which seems to be the heart of the universe, rightly understood. So now, as you resume your conversation, this may be interrupted again and again and again, and hence every time it's interrupted, you patiently, without getting excited, without getting frustrated or annoyed, which would be another thought, and hence, since annoyance or an emotional attraction or charge is a more powerful thought than a simple passing thought in your imagination, you're in a worse position than you were before you reacted. Hence, there are one of the basic recommendations is at no time react emotionally to any perception, thought, feeling that may arise and pass down the stream of consciousness. Along comes at times one flashy boat after another. Sometimes you may feel as if you're not just watching boats going by. You may feel as though you were sitting under Niagara Falls or something, and the whole river with all its boats, ice is falling on top of your head. Still, this little buoy is there to return to again and again and again, and this patience in difficult times is one of the great means of establishing oneself in this spiritual awareness, which is kind of watching attitude towards what is happening in our psyche. And this watching of what is passing along the surface of our consciousness grows with time and gives one the realization that one isn't really identified with these thoughts, hence they can't hinder one's basic communing with God. They just prevent you from enjoying it. When all the boats are cleared for a while, then you begin to enjoy the deep waters of interior silence, peace, quiet, and presence, an anointing of calmness and quiet. I shouldn't quite say a massage, an interior massage. That might be a little too concrete. But the kind of well-being that comes from a good massage, only a spiritual one, in which all one's muscles and one's nervous system and one's senses kind of relax and sometimes are bathed with the sort of peace that is like ointment and calm. Well, this is the kind of experience that convinces the emotional life that has been damaged at some point that this practice is really worthwhile. And so they give you less trouble. Once they get interested in this process, they begin to quiet down more and more habitually instead of raising embarrassing questions. So I've described now two kinds of thoughts and how to respond to them. The first are wool-gathering thoughts that don't really attract your attention. You just ignore them, like the background music. When one or other thought, perception, feeling attracts your attention, then one needs to return to the sacred symbol to renew your intention. Otherwise, you may get on the boat and be carried downstream and have to start over. Well, there's going to be a lot of starting over, of course. And this practice requires an exercise of faith and trust and the love of God all the time that you're sitting there, and hence these virtues that the Spirit arouses in us are constantly growing as you exercise them. Even if you are not making particular acts of each, they're all kind of wrapped up in a package that is in which you are participating. At this point, then, having developed the habit of letting go by returning to the sacred symbol, and having developed a certain spiritual attentiveness that for which there is no description, because it's beyond images, symbols, words, thoughts, and feelings. And so when this experience develops, and one can enter into it fairly readily, although one is pulled out from time to time, one begins to want to stay there, and now the thoughts that attract one are painful, because we're afraid that if we look at this feeling or thought, which we are habitually programmed to do, we'll be pulled out of this deep, quiet peace and calm. Let's then imagine that we are in that kind of space, like a little fish swimming around in these calm and peaceful waters of interior silence, without wanting to think of anything, feeling very at home there, a sense of having come home, a sense of wholeness. And so naturally we want to stay there and prolong this wonderful peace. Well, into that space, someone goes fishing and lowers this intellectual bait into our marvelous space. Now, in that depth, the whole perspective of life is somewhat different, somewhat like snorkeling, where our perceptions are different when you're 200 feet below the surface of the water. The distance has a different meaning. And so here in the deep interior space, any thought seems to be fantastic for some reason. It seems so clear and so bright in that interior space. So it can be a psychological breakthrough. One suddenly realizes why one always disliked people with red hair. It seems that you suddenly realize that an aunt who had red hair used to beat you up all the time when you were 1.5. You'd forgotten it, repressed it into the unconscious. But the dislike for red hair, which you as a baby had programmed in your brain, sets off the flashing lights every time you see a red head. Now at last you're delivered from this phobia. Well, there's a tremendous desire to think about that so you won't forget it. So you say to yourself, oh my, I must think about that when our prayer is over. That's enough to pull you out. You have sunk your teeth on this juicy intellectual worm, and you're now hooked, and zoom, you go out onto the bank and have to start over. Now, it's true, you do get some psychological breakthroughs every now. All I can say is, if it's a good one, you'll remember it later. And if you, often when you get out on the bank, you realize it was nothing new anyway. It just seemed new, it seemed fantastic when you were in that space. The same thing happens to theological insights. If you're a teacher, a preacher, a teacher of CCD, or you read your Bible and have always wondered who the Trinity was, well, all of a sudden in this space, you suddenly have solved the mystery of the Holy Trinity that the theologians of the ages have been trying to resolve and without success. So it seems so clear, you know just how to explain it. Or again, you think of the perfect argument to convert your atheistic friends. And you say to yourself, I'm going to just think about that 1 minute to impress it on my memory, so when I get out, I'll be able to preach a fabulous sermon or convert this guy or whatever. Once again, you have sunk your teeth into this juicy intellectual worm, and out you go with the speed of light onto the bank. So it begins to dawn on you after a while that there's something wrong with your method, and you begin through the painful experience of its effects to realize that this is the time for interior silence and nothing else, so that even if the heavens open and you see the Lord Jesus, like Stephen the deacon on the right hand of the Father, return to the sacred word. Same advice for every situation. Now you may say that's a little surprising advice. The answer is, if it's really a vision from the Lord, you won't be able to do anything anyway, because it's so overwhelming, you just are overwhelmed. But as soon as you're in the position where you can do something about it, start reflecting, then you're back in the false self system, and the false self system will begin to work on this marvelous vision and turn it into an ego trip. St. John of the Cross teaches that any supernatural communication, like vision, locution, auditory responses that seem to have a supernatural or a source, accomplish their work if they come from God instantly, without your thinking about it at all. And by thinking about it, we usually diminish its original force and power. That tendency to reflect on it comes from our desire to possess it, to hang on to it, not to forget it, so we can perhaps recapture it under our own strength. We're now getting to those levels of subtle possessiveness that are the basic source and root of the whole false self system. Greed is really the first movement, whether it be for material things or if you're a spiritual person. For spiritual goods, it's the first movement of someone who is not experiencing divine union. Divine union is human health. When you have not the sense of being during this fixed period of time, is a discipline that directs itself like an arrow to the heart of the problem of human transformation, the resistance in us to trust God completely, or the resistance to let go of our props, security blankets, and other means of shoring up our fragile egos that have become habitual because we had to have something to hold us together when the experience, sense, conviction of divine union is not present. So if we can let go then of these thoughts from the spiritual world that provide us with a much more refined and much more pure kind of object for our greed, then we'll begin to experience the freedom and the growth of trust and the love of God, which really releases all the creative energies and orders them, balances them, refines them. In this connection, there's another kind of thought that occurs in this deep space of interior silence and peace. If we succeed in making up our minds to let go of these particular supernatural or devout reflections, experiences, which doesn't mean to resist them, it simply means let them come, let them go. We're creatures in time and space. Everything that comes by externally or everything that's reflected internally on the inner screen of consciousness always goes by if you just wait a minute. Every moment of time passes along with everything in it, and a whole new world comes into being, so to speak, the next second. And so any thought, however painful or however joyful, as long as it's received in the time and space world in which we are placed, is going to go by if you just hang in there and just wait. Let it come, let it go.